Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to our event today. My name is Alper Coşkun. I'm a senior fellow at the Europe program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. And I will be moderating our debate today, our debate on the war in Ukraine, a war in which we are witnessing an unjust act against Ukraine, an act of armed aggression that has created terrible human suffering. The UNHCR estimates that as of today, there are more than 4.5 million Ukrainians that have had to flee the country, that there are more than 6.5 million people who have been internally displaced. And meanwhile, we have all been shocked by the indiscriminate and at times seemingly deliberate killing of civilians in places like Bucha and the train station in eastern Ukraine. This war has already been assessed as a geopolitical milestone that has started to dramatically change the international landscape. And in many respects, I think it's fair to argue that it is also a geo-economic milestone. And today, we will try to contribute to this global debate on this important issue by focusing on something specific, and that is namely Turkey's role in this crisis, in this state of war. Turkey has often been referred to as a country that is conducting a balancing act, something that we've alluded to in the title of our event today. And we will try to make sense of Ankara's objectives, as well as its challenges and possibly its conundrums. We will be examining Turkey's position from several angles. We will try to understand primarily Ukraine's expectations, and then we will try to dig deeper into Ankara's calculations, then try to see things from the prism of the United States. And finally, we will also examine expectations and perceptions from the European side as far as Turkey's role is concerned. And to help us do this, I'm very proud to present a very distinguished panel of speakers that have kindly agreed to join us today. To set the stage, we will start with Ambassador Vasyl Bodnar, who is the Ukrainian ambassador to Turkey. He has served previously as the deputy foreign minister of his country, and he is currently at the heart of the dynamic exchange between Turkey and Ukraine. Thank you for kindly joining us from Ankara, Ambassador. Then we will
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody.
It's our pleasure to have you. Thank you. Then we will turn to Tacan Ildem, who is a career Turkish diplomat, recently retired. He was the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. He was a member of the group of experts that were commissioned by the NATO Secretary General to work on NATO's 2030 agenda. And he is currently the chairman of a prominent think tank named Ildem in Turkey. And maybe most importantly, he's a long-time and invaluable mentor to me. Welcome, Tacan Bey. Very nice to have you as well.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
We will then turn to Hümeyra Pamuk, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Hümeyra. She is the senior State Department correspondent for Reuters. She keeps a very close eye on U.S. foreign policy and is a first-hand witness of U.S. priorities in this state of war, as well as the U.S. approach to the state of bilateral relations with Turkey. Last, but certainly not least, we will turn to Bruno Tertrais, who unfortunately hasn't been able to join yet, but he has given me a heads up that he might be a little late, so we expect him to join soon. He is the Deputy Director of a leading think tank in France, the Foundation for Strategic Studies, and I will once again introduce him when he joins us. Now let's turn to Ambassador Vasyl Bodnar to set the stage for our debate. Dear Vasyl, we seem to be entering a new stage in the war. I want to hear your views in any direction that you wish, but particularly the question that I had in mind is, what is Russia, in your view and in Ukraine's view, preparing to do in the East? And how do you assess President Putin's strategy in the long run? And as Ukraine is bracing for what seems to be a focused attack in the East, what will you expect from Turkey in this new phase of the war? The floor is yours.
Dear, well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and I really appreciate your invitation. So it's late night late evening in Ankara, and we are really happy to see the 47th day of our defense in Ukraine is very strong, and we are still keeping line and pushing Russians in some places back. Nevertheless, you have mentioned a very specific question, asking what is Putin's target. So it's very simple. They would like to subordinate Ukraine, to conquer it, and to demolish or de-Ukrainize Ukraine, or demolish Ukrainian nation. That is as simple as that. But tactical targets are being changed almost every day. For example, today, Russia announced that they are conducting so-called special operations targeted to decrease the US role in global dimension. Very specific issue, why they are fighting now in Ukraine. So let's do something with the United States. What are they doing in Ukraine? But it's like a joke, but nevertheless, so we are really suffering very tremendous attacks. And the liberated territories show how cruel is the enemy. And their attacks is not being stopped, but they just lost the battle around Kiev, Chernihiv, and Sumy, and they are now trying to reconcentrate their efforts and try to attack the eastern part of the country and try to keep the southern part of the country. So in south, they're trying to conduct some kind of political control. They are providing different types of subversive operations, trying to demolish the Ukrainian resistance there and trying to control the system of life there. But you have seen the number of cities and towns Ukrainians are resisting, even peacefully. In eastern part, the front line is very strong, and we are trying to keep them, despite they are concentrating their efforts to bypass Kharkiv and to continue the attacks on the Izum. And from Izum, they mentioned the directions to encircle our forces around Donetsk and Luhansk region. And most probably, the next target, in case they manage to do it, is to continue their advance to Dnipro and Zaporizhia, the most industrialized cities, which was their target in 2014, but they didn't manage there. And also Mariupol is suffering very hugely, but defending also strongly. So still a number of our forces is keeping the defense and trying to withstand the continuous attacks, but also a number of civilians are suffering. And still Russians does not allow majority of them to leave the city and to feel safe in other territories. So still the biggest problem is the civilians are dying, and we still do not feel enough supplied with the necessary weapons to withstand this continuous Russian aggression. So my first appeal to your audience is, whatever you can do, help us with weapons. Weapons we need to defend not only Ukraine, but to defend Europe and to defend world in the face of possible World War III. It is reality, unfortunately. With the Turkish role, it's really significant because the Turkey is doing its best to support Ukraine. First of all, we consider that political support from the Turkish side is very essential. And if you will look at the estimations that have been conducted in Turkey, it should be looked from the different angles, but majority of people, almost 80%, say that they do not support any of these aggressive acts of Russia, and they are against all these brutalities. Despite the reasons who started the war is a little bit different, but maybe we will discuss it in the course of our discussions. So political support is important, and it's very necessary also in the international arena, and most probably will be necessary when we will be doing our best to bring Russia to accountability for all the acts that they have been conducted. So we will be asking Turkish side to participate in these commissions or fact-finding missions or whatever it will be called for discovering or estimating the situation on the ground, finding these war criminals on the ground of judicial basis, and also to work together as an international community to bring all the guys who are responsible to responsibility. Second dimension is humanitarian, and both our embassy and Turkish government are working hardly to collect all possible humanitarian assistance and to send to Ukraine, and also to help people here in Turkey, which came in dozens of thousands. So according to the different estimations, more than 85,000 already came here, but some of them, or almost a half, left the country. But those who are here, they need assistance, they need location, they need food, and we are working together closely with the Turkish authorities and Turkish community and business, and Ukrainian business as well is involved, to locate our people and to accommodate them as much as possible. And also very important dimension is defense, but I will not elaborate here. It's more close information, classified, but nevertheless it's important. And also mediation. So the recent meeting in Istanbul was fruitful, and most probably it was considered as the end of some part of the negotiations, but unfortunately these evidences of brutality in Bucha and other places also show us a little bit the other side of the story. But nevertheless, there was a progress, and we really appreciate the efforts which have been conducted by the Turkish side. It is still not enough. It is still the process, the beginning of the process, and I would say that a long way ahead of us. And unfortunately, not a diplomatic flaw will be the main, but a battlefield. And once again, the stronger Ukrainian army is, the shortest negotiation will be, and it will be the shortest period of time to reach an agreement with Russian aggressor. And also, we should also look critically at the issues of, for example, sanctions, because still Turkish side is considering this issue carefully, but to many dimensions, Turkey does not join. And even more, some businesses trying to work with Russia and to continue their business as usual. We are paying attention to authorities. We are paying attention to business communities. We understand the interests. We understand the limits of Turkish side, but still it is the issue which we could work together on and draw attention to the necessity not to support the guys who conducted criminal acts. That's as simple as that. And the brutality here should not be tolerated with any possible pluses in turnover or in another dimension. So I'm not trying to deliberate, let's say, this issue in public opinion here, but nevertheless, we need to look at this issue carefully and work together to limit the cooperation. The other thing is that very important is about Montreal Convention, and we're really happy that Turkish side closed the straits for Russian ships. To some extent, it helps us, and it also prevent from the further escalations in the Black Sea area. But also, we should look at the ships which are used by the Ministry of Defense of Russia and trying to continue their shipments through the straits. And most probably, they try to bring some weapons and something to the battlefield. So summarizing, I would say that we believe that Turkey is on our side, but we still need to work together on different other issues related to the business and tourism and any other areas which still not covered with this exact situation. But from the other side, we believe also that Turkish society is also hugely supportive for Ukraine, and we feel it also when collecting humanitarian assistance. So this is the second dimension of the story, because when our embassy was almost a month turned to the point of collecting all the possible humanitarian assistance, and even simple people came and take its gold or something and belongings, selling giving to us just to support Ukrainian kids and Ukrainian women. It's also show how strong Turkish community is related to Ukraine and how sympathetic it is. So maybe I'll stop here and try to answer the questions if any will be. Thank you.
Vasyl, thank you very much, dear Ambassador. That was very useful to see where Turkey stands as far as Ukraine's perspective is concerned. I'd like to open up parentheses. I forgot to make this point at the beginning for all of our participants. If you do have questions, and I would encourage you to do so, please, you can share them in the chat function, and we will try and address all of your questions to contribute to this debate. I would now like to turn to Tacan. Listening to Vasyl, Ambassador Bodnar, the points that he made as far as Turkey's posture, if you will, in terms of the war in Ukraine, the notes that I took as far as Ukraine's expectations are accountability, and this is something new for me, I have to confess. Vasyl spoke about a future fact-finding mission and that Ukraine would expect Turkey to contribute to this. He spoke about the humanitarian dimension, where Turkey is already working closely with Ukraine. He spoke briefly about the defense aspect of the matter without understandably going into details. And then he spoke about mediation, which has captured a lot of headlines. Maybe facilitation of the talks might be the more appropriate wording in this regard. And he referred to the fact that the meeting in Istanbul particularly was fruitful, but of course he highlighted Bucha and how that was detrimental to the process. And then he spoke about sanctions, where there is a mixed picture based on what he said, as far as I can understand. Tacan, turning to you, Turkey promptly identified Russia's act against Ukraine as war. It closed down the Turkish Straits, as Vasyl mentioned, and it has been supplying weapons to Ukraine prior to the war, something that many NATO allies started doing only in the aftermath of the war. And of course, Turkey has an intense and rather complex web of relations with the Russian Federation. This has led to what many have referred to as a balancing act on the part of Ankara. And I would be interested to hear your views. But before giving the floor to you, let me welcome Bruno. Bruno, thank you so much. I know that you're on a very tight schedule, but you were kind enough to join. We're looking forward to hearing from you in due course. I've already introduced you, so I will not repeat that, but thank you once again for joining us. Now I'd like to turn to Tacan and give the floor to him.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank Carnegie Europe for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel and to be with you, Alper, as you will be acting as our moderator. It is also a pleasure this time to be with Ambassador Bodnar. I recall our very useful exchange of views a few days before Russia launched its war on Ukraine. And if I borrow the words of NATO leaders at their summit meeting, Ukrainians have inspired the world with heroic resistance to Russia's brutal war of conquest. And this is really something remarkable and worth praising. Now, in terms of Turkey's role and how it positioned itself from the start of this crisis, we have to see that Turkey's stand has been clear and consistent. Considering that the invasion is a blatant violation of international law and a heavy blow to peace and stability in the region, Turkey declared Russian aggression in Ukraine unacceptable and rejected it. Being a NATO ally, Turkey also took part in the decisions that the alliance made in strengthening its deterrence and defense in the face of the unfolding crisis. And we could see this in the decisions of both the leaders, but also the recent meeting of the foreign ministers. When we look at the decision to strengthen the eastern flank by additional 4 battle groups, and Turkey's intentions to send troops to Bulgaria and Hungary is known. So this is one element that we need to take into account. On the other hand, Turkey having relations with both Russia and Ukraine, and also cognizant of regional sensitivities, has been actively pursuing a diplomatic solution to bring an end to the conflict. And I was in Antalya together with you, Alper, at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. And I think the meeting of both Lavrov and Kuleba, foreign ministers, provided a good introduction of both sides to possibilities, how to bring this hostility to an end. It was a good first step, which was followed up by the meeting in Istanbul, which gave us a cautious optimism for ways to reach a settlement of the ongoing crisis. Ambassador Bodnar also referred to Turkey's role as the custodian of the Montreux Convention. And I think it was quite crucial for Turkey to analyze the situation in the first days of the crisis and to declare the situation as a war and to start implementing Article 19 of the Convention by invoking it a few days after the launch of Russia's aggressive attack against Ukraine, which enabled Turkey to make sure that the belligerent parties, the parties in war, cannot pass their naval vessels through the straits, with the exception that those who have their bases in the Black Sea could be able to return. Nevertheless, it also informed all countries to refrain from sending their warships. And I think it was an important step. Turkey has a very good historical reputation in implementing Montreux Convention with its in line with its letter and spirit. So I think this is an important element to take into consideration. Now, with respect to the sanctions, it is true that Turkey has not joined those who start implementing the sanctions against Russia, but Turkey has a very particular position regarding sanctions in general. Throughout the recent history, Turkey has never implemented sanctions imposed by a country or a group of countries. It rather implemented sanctions imposed by the United Nations. And Turkey is in a rather a delicate situation also to have this balancing act that you were referring to. And I think this balancing act is also useful for the international community because it also provides a possibility to use its facilitation efforts with a view to bringing this war to an end. And I know that, for instance, when the declaration of the airspaces to be close to Russia aircraft, Turkey perhaps not joined that decision, but still started implementing in such a way, not letting the civil airplanes moving from Syria to Russia or vice versa, with a view to preventing the foreign fighters to go to Ukraine to support the Russian war activities. I have to say that sometimes the perception of Turkey's relations with Russia is not put in the right context. And we have heard and seen many commentaries in the past prior to this war, whether Turkey was shifting its axis or the rapprochement with Russia would mean to leave NATO. And this was not the case and will not be the case in the future. Turkey has a long relationship with Russia throughout history, and even during the Ottoman Empire, the Russia was one power that Ottoman Empire fought against with many wars, and the relationship was not an easy one after the Second World War, when we remember the unilateral claims that Russia leveled with Turkey, with the control of the straits and territorial claims on eastern provinces. But in any case, Turkey and the Turkish Republic has been maintaining a working relationship, which we may qualify to be a competitive cooperation. In certain instances, the relations were transactional. In many geographical areas, we had to deal with Russia in order to deconflict our military presence there. But it didn't mean that we were eyeball to eyeball with the Russian side. In fact, on many questions, we were on the different sides of the equation. So Turkey's engagement with Russia is not a choice, but perhaps out of necessity, also dictated by geography. Russia was our northern neighbor, but now not only northern neighbor, it is also our southern neighbor. So these realities have to be borne in mind while making an assessment about Turkey's relations with Russia. Ukraine is our strategic partner, and I think we have shown our support even before the war started by engaging with the Ukrainian side in the last 11 years, and we qualify it to be a strategic partnership encompassing many areas of activities, but also an important area of activity, which is defense industry. It is not only to sell or buy certain weaponry systems, but also to cooperate in joint production and defense industry dynamics. So this relationship is also very valuable to us. And Turkey does not want any prolongation of this brutal war, which brings enormous human suffering, destruction of cities, affecting well-being of people in Ukraine, but also has serious repercussions for the regional stability that Turkey cares about. I mean, Turkey has always been keen to create peace and stability in the Black Sea Basin with the ownership of the littoral states. Of course, right now we are far from it with Russia's aggressive acts starting from 2008, but 2014 being a watershed year. But still, we hope that in the future, these ideas could be brought to surface. In any case, one thing is clear. Russia's revisionist approach is unacceptable because with the interpretation of history you cannot just define another independent state to be a denomination of the Russian Federation, and to consider sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity as rights which could be divided among nations. Some enjoy 100%, but some in the near neighborhood of Russia can only exercise with the consent and to the extent that Russia permits. This is unacceptable. These are against the fundamental principles that underpin European and global security. And if Russia wants to renegotiate these in terms of indivisibility of security, quote unquote, or legitimate security concerns or requirements of the Russian Federation, I don't think that these ideas can be entertained in any future negotiating process. And the international community should be very clear and resolute about that.
Tacan, thank you so much for an extensive overview of the challenges that Turkey faces as a NATO ally, as a country that has a strategic partnership relationship with Ukraine that has been developing over the years, but also as a country that has an important level of interaction, obviously, with the Russian Federation. You've outlined the position and the posturing that Turkey has made. And I think one thing you spoke about is the perception of Turkey and its interaction with the Russian Federation. The talk in the past, the questions as to whether Turkey was changing axis or not. That leads us very well into the continuation of our debate. But I want to make a small change with the indulgence of our next speakers, of Hümeyra and Bruno. I wish to give the floor initially to Bruno, because I know that he has little time left available. Bruno, thank you once again for your patience and for joining us today. Now, the war in Ukraine has upended many calculations on a global scale, including particularly in Europe. It's changed a lot of assumptions that we thought would hold for years to come. And obviously, while there are still many challenges, I think it's fair to say that the strategic culture in Europe has been altered for good. I'd like to hear your assessment in that regard, and to hear your views as to how Turkey fits into this changing dynamic. Thank you. The floor is yours, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Alper. It's very good to see you all. I apologize in advance for making only a brief appearance to this distinguished event. To be very honest with you, it's actually my 8-year-old who's running around, and I have to take care of him today. And it's, as many of you know, it has to be the priority. I'm delighted anyway. Yes, I think there is a change in strategic culture, which was epitomized by 2 events. One was the major speech by Chancellor Scholz a few weeks ago, which was, I think, it is a game changer. We'll have to see how much of it is put in practice, but at least in rhetoric and in thinking, there is something fundamental going on in Germany. Second was, I think, the EU trip to Kiev 2 days ago, which I think that beyond the symbolic was accompanied by concrete gestures such as the physical handling of the accession candidacy thanks to President Zelensky, as well as words by Josep Borrell, which were sort of words that you almost never hear from an EU official, such as, well, there will be a time for diplomacy, but diplomacy will be determined by the battle on the ground. So in a nutshell, yes, something is going on, and given that this war is almost certainly going to last, I think this is going to last. Since you're asking me about the perception of Turkey, I think it's a very interesting topic. Let me give you a view from Paris, not necessarily the view from Paris. I have not consulted with government colleagues, but let me sketch out for you in a few sentences how I think that the mainstream view of the Turkish role these days is evolving. Overall, it's been a pleasant surprise. One which has to be understood in a broader picture. The broader picture being the the not so good economic situation, the development of new political relations, or at least warmer political relations with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, President Erdogan's visit to Abu Dhabi, as well as I understand them, some normal, or at least back to normal Greek talk. Greek-Turkish talks recently. This has been accompanied, of course, some in Europe and in France in particular have pointed out that the Turkey is not applying the sanctions, but Turkey has some very powerful drones which do make a difference on the ground, and that's something that having your own weapons making a difference on the ground is something that not all NATO countries and not all EU countries do. So this is all very positive. I think that if one takes a step back and try to analyze it once again from our standpoint, the whys of the reasons, we're aware of the fact that Turkey is trying beyond its genuine, what I think is a genuine commitment to Ukraine's security, is also trying to make sure that it does not become a loser in this geopolitical game. It does see the wind of change. It has strong economic connections to most countries, but those with Ukraine are sometimes underestimated, at least in France. But I would say that a feeling of caution is also in order here in Paris, in the sense that most of the people I've spoken to wonder if Turkey has sort of passed the point of no return in terms of a Western solidarity, or is it just playing its best cards and then wait to see if there is an opportunity to go to a more balanced, to a kind of balancing act. And most importantly, some of us wonder what it will mean when the next presidential elections when the campaign for the 2023 elections will start in earnest. In other words, to sum up, I would say that it's genuine, it's welcome. How durable it is still a question mark for many of the people that I've spoken to in France. That's a very broad picture, and not a mixed one. It's overall a positive one, though. But I think we're not sure yet how long it would last. But we should enjoy it. We should enjoy it while it lasts.
Bruno, thank you very much for your intervention and for your brief remarks. Am I correct in assuming that you will have to leave us at 15 past?
That is correct, indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. I will now move on to our very patient and final panelist, that is Hümeyra Pamuk, the correspondent, the senior correspondent for Reuters in Washington, D.C. Hümeyra, thank you for agreeing to be last and for changing the lineup. I want to focus on the view from the United States through your eyes. And, the Turkish-U.S. relations have been going through a relatively rough patch in the past couple of years. There are small signs of movement in some areas, but the core issues remain untouched. I'm curious how the war in Ukraine and the changing geopolitical realities may impact on this state of affairs between Turkey and the United States. Is there a newfound sense of appreciation in Washington, D.C. for the role that Turkey can provide as a NATO ally in these new geopolitical realities that we've all been reminded of? And how is Turkey's posturing in the face of this war perceived in Washington, D.C.? The floor is yours, Hümeyra. Thank you.
Thank you, Alper Bey. I'm very glad to be part of this distinguished panel as well. I just want to give very quickly the mood from Washington. I've been covering the Biden administration for about 15 months now, and when they first came to power, the foreign policy priorities that they've had was quite different from what is consuming their oxygen at the moment. Surely Russia was and was going to be a top foreign policy priority, but the administration has made it very clear that its long-term strategic focus would be on Asia, on strengthening alliances in the Indo-Pacific with the aim to counter China. now fast forward to today, we're seeing that that is certainly still a priority, but on top of it, Washington is having to deal with trying to peel off China from cooperating with Russia on every aspect of Ukraine. And that's already happening. And the administration is having to play catch up to basically push back on the negative consequences of that in a number of areas. And what is that? What is the consequence of that? The administration is basically having to rethink how it looks at certain allies. I would say that I think it has given so far a good performance on its solidarity with the European allies, but you don't necessarily see the same when it comes to Middle Eastern allies. But that area and the wider area of Turkey was not necessarily a region that Biden administration had in its foreign policy priorities when it came to power, right? Like Middle East, the way they wanted to handle Middle East and that part of the world was like very occasion focused. They had like specific goals, but they didn't necessarily have a strategic view. Now with this war, that area is back on Biden administration's near-term radar. It is having to rethink about how it conducts its relationship with Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates. And the same goes, I think, for Turkey as well. Like, I'm not necessarily bundling up all of those, but I think it's fair to say that its focus was elsewhere. It was very much Asia focused, but now it is having to rethink about like where its immediate focus is going to be. And if I can quickly move on to the U.S.-Turkey relations before the war and after the war, I think it's fair to say that before the Ukraine war, we've seen a very reserved administration, right? They came to power and they made it extremely clear that there is a new sheriff in town and he's very different from his predecessor. They made it very clear that they wanted a very institutionalized bilateral relationship. They did not want leaders' diplomacy, the kind of diplomacy like specifically focused on former President Trump and President Erdogan. And then we've seen like a barrage of statements from State Department in the early days of the administration criticizing Turkey's deteriorating human rights track record, the intervention of police on Boğaziçi University students. These statements were like very unheard of during the previous administration because, I mean, Trump administration basically did not have a lot of regard for human rights in the first place, but these were not the kinds of statements and criticisms that we've seen from the previous administration. And they've also made it very clear in their rhetoric that they wanted Turkey to come back under the NATO umbrella. In every single statement, this was a specific emphasis. This was Washington's way of saying, I'm aware that you have drifted away towards Russia's sphere of influence, and I would love it if you would come back. This is from basically US point of view. And obviously we should note that President Biden took his time, quite a lot of time, to give President Erdogan a call. And the first call was basically about Armenian genocide. So we're seeing a very reserved Washington. And then again, fast forward to today, its focus has shifted. And past February 24th, there is a flurry of diplomatic activity. Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman went to Turkey. Undersecretary Victoria Nuland went to Turkey. Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu have held a number of telephone conversations. There has been a flurry of diplomatic activity on a number of levels, some of them publicly announced, and others, like there has been a number of private conversations as well. But I think it's really important to have a reality check about what this is. While I do think that there is a window of opportunity here for the relations, I think it's really important for both sides to fully hear each other and understand what the other side wants. Based on my reporting and my conversations, I feel that Turkey feels that Washington has now understood its value and is going to come to Turkey, say, like with some offers so that they can solve some of these long-standing and fundamental issues. Whereas in Washington, I hear that, well, we're looking for like some creative ways to find a solution to the long-standing problems, but we're hoping that Turkey has now realized that it really shouldn't be close to Russia. It should come back to the NATO sphere. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, there is a window of opportunity, but I think how it's going to pan out and whether or not it's going to yield to tangible results on a number of really difficult issues, difficult outstanding issues, is going to be dependent on how well the two sides understand each other, read each other, and whether they will be able to come up with tangible, concrete solutions. And I'm very happy to talk about certain things. And some of those would be, obviously, there's the F-16s, there's the S-400 issue that has not gone on anywhere. Turkey wants to come back to the F-35 program. I have not seen any indication of like US would be open to maybe talk about it, but I have not seen like any concrete path here that suggests that that is doable at this stage. One other priority for the United States is that the sanctions that it has imposed on Russia and the oligarchs is fully enforced, and that no country, including Turkey, would not become some sort of a safe haven or like a region where Russian oligarchs are able to bypass those sanctions. So, and I am very well aware that Ankara has its own concerns about how well US understands it. So I'll leave it at that, but I think there's quite a bit of unpack in there, but I think it's going to be really important how well the two sides understand each other going forward.
Hümeyra, thank you. That was really excellent and very useful to understand the implications for Turkish-US relations and how the US administration basically has had to change some of its priorities, as you mentioned, a very different geopolitical environment as to when, in comparison to when the Biden administration took office. And I think the most striking comment that you made, or the aspect of the picture that you depicted, was the delta that you highlighted in terms of how Turkey now seems to possibly be viewing its role in a more important, if you will, light, and in the expectation that the US will recognize this as well. Whereas on the US side, the perspective may be, hopefully Turkey has realized that its ties to the West and so on is more important. So that is a very important delta that you have highlighted. We've received a number of questions. I know that our participants, our panelists are able to see them as well. I've run through them and my colleague is sharing them with our panelists in the private chat. They're welcome to look at those. I'd just like to highlight a couple of these questions as I have been able to take note. And they're open to all of the panelists, obviously, but I will be naming some of you because I think there's a direct focus in that respect. Vasyl, particularly for you, one question that came to the fore is about Ukraine's NATO membership. The question is whether that is still in the cards, or whether Ukraine is officially ready to forfeit that goal. And I think we've heard President Zelensky make some comments in that regard. So I'd be interested to hear your views. And another theme that seems to be coming up recurrently is about Turkey's role in the face of the sanctions regime. There's criticism also in the questions regarding Turkey's position. What more, realistically speaking, do you think Turkey can do? I think Ukraine is probably in the best position to understand the challenges that Turkey faces. And I believe the state of the Turkish economy, its energy dependency on Russia, all these have to be factored in. So those are questions that I'd like to highlight, particularly for you, but for all of our panelists. Tacan, if I may, for you, would Turkey support Finland and Sweden joining NATO? Is a specific question that came in your direction. And then there was a question about Turkey's decision on the Montreux Convention, whether Turkey consulted NATO allies on its decision to ask warring parties or non-riparians not to transit the Straits. I think there's quite a bit of fog in that sense. Turkey referred to Article 19, which talks about belligerent powers not passing through the Straits. So I believe the question is about non-riparian states, whether Turkey spoke to its NATO allies about its decision. Hümeyra, you spoke about the F-16. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that. You also made a news piece on this. I think that delta that you mentioned and the view from Ankara that there should be a newfound appreciation in Washington about Turkey's posture and its importance in this geopolitical reality probably has triggered a more positive mood in terms of expectations as regards Turkey's F-16 purchase request from the US. How do you see that evolving? And what is the view from DC, a little bit more in detail, if I may, as far as Turkey's position vis-a-vis sanctions are concerned? Is that the number one item that the US raises? You did make the point that the US doesn't want Turkey to become a loophole. My understanding is that Turkey is not there yet. The US is not criticizing Turkey to that extent, but they're keeping a close eye. So I'll just put these questions out for you. Vasyl, can we start with you, please? And
yes,
then
yes, with pleasure.
Hümeyra and then to Tacan. Go ahead, Vasyl.
I will just like to elaborate a little bit more on what Hümeyra said. It's about this solidarity within the NATO, because it is not the only, let's say, one point which could dictate to another. It's a collective branch or collective organ which could be discussing all necessary steps to be done together, I mean all the NATO allies. And for Ukraine today, this internal solidarity is crucial. So to withstand all the attacks and all the, let's say, aggression we are now facing, we need strong and clear NATO, one view, one policy, one voice with regard to this war. And maybe the first step or the zero step should be done. It's to, let's say, decrease the tension inside NATO and to, let's say, lift all these sanctions, limits, etc., which were established before the war. Maybe to look at from this perspective, then the unity of NATO will be stronger, and there will be no different views from Paris, from Washington, or from Ankara on this policy with regard to Russia. It's one point. The second point with Ukraine, I would like just to remind that there is a provision in the constitution of Ukraine that Ukraine should bid for the NATO membership, and to change this provision in the constitution, we need to have no martial law at least 1 year. For what period of time the war will last, we didn't know. So it means that even if we potentially could agree on some kind of status, which we are de facto now, because we are a neutral state, we could have a long process. First of all, internal discussion. Ukrainian population is now 72% supporting for NATO. Could you convince Ukrainian populations to give up this direction? No. Will the parliament pass the changes in the constitution, which will lead to decrease or to delete this point from the constitution? I don't believe in that. The other point is about the practical implementation of this story. So why we need NATO? We need to protect ourselves from all the aggressive attempts of our neighbors, because there are two. We're not mentioning Belarus. Belarus is also on the aggressive side of the story, and they are providing assistance to the Russian side. They're giving them land, logistics, support for the wounded, etc., etc. So it is also part of the war, de facto, not de jure, but de facto. So we need to be protected. And our idea, or the idea which was promoted by President Zelensky, was to substitute, in case we couldn't be the NATO member, because NATO wouldn't like this, not we wouldn't like to be the member. And we are grateful to Turkey for this constant support in this regard. But many NATO countries, they're still keeping us aside. That's a true story. And that was a mistake of the West not to adopt decision 2008. That was the correct answer to the story. Because in case this decision was adopted, then the situation could look differently. So if we couldn't get this membership, then by these so-called guarantees, which means in our understanding, the concrete substitution of Article 5 of NATO Treaty, it means that all guarantor states should militarily participate in defending Ukraine. No paper guarantees, no declarations, just tanks and military brigades. plus anti-aircraft missiles and everything which is necessary to protect us physically. That's the story. And also why Russia is, the idea is to engage also Russia, because to have this collective responsibility and also to be pushed by other members or other guarantors not to do any wrong things in the future. But it's still all theoretical. Even discussions in Istanbul, they were just a progress from the point, minus point, because what Russia proposed at the beginning, it was just Versailles Treaty 2, give up and we will pardon you. That was all story. When they have been beaten in the battlefield, only then they start to discuss real terms of possible peace accord. But it will not be a peace accord. It should be a treaty of guarantee with multilateral participation. And only after that, when we will stabilize the situation, pull back all Russian forces and establish ceasefire or peace, then we will work for this accountability, for the reconstruction, who will pay for that, etc. So many more issues. And other thing is, which we should look at this now, it's about the future construction of the security in the world, or what the system should be, because today's Security Council is nothing. It doesn't work. Guarantees which was provided to Ukraine in the 90s, nothing. Still, we didn't know what is NATO, indeed, because we should, if it will be tested, for example, if Estonia will be invaded, will Americans or Turkish soldiers go to fight for Estonia? I still doubt. How indecisive it was during our war, or during this first weeks of war, and how many words should be said to convince to provide us something, it is still the issue. And there's no unanimity. And it's also the issue about the possible attacks of the NATO members. So more questions than answers now. And what we are defending, it is also thanks to us, first of all, because it was our decision not to give up, but to defend and to resist. And only then we are counting on the other countries' support, which understand that if we will fail, the next will be their lands. That's the story. Sorry for being emotional.
Not at all, Vasyl, and I think that was extremely professional and very useful. You have our sympathy if you are emotional in any way whatsoever, because the nature of what you are dealing with is very grave, and we understand that. I hate to try and summarize what you have said, because there is so much, and I don't want to do a disservice. With your indulgence, I just want to highlight 2 points without undermining anything else that you have said or without omitting anything else. But I think those were important. What you are focusing on now is weapons, because what is making the change is what happens on the ground. What you are focusing on looking into the future, if I understand correctly, is guarantees. And you spoke of
accountability.
Of course, and accountability. But in terms of future security for Ukraine, you're talking about the need for guarantees. And you mentioned something even bigger than that, which is very important for everyone, including Turkey. What kind of a security architecture will we be working towards in the future? And I think these are very important questions. Hümeyra, I want to turn to you as background with these questions and the other questions that I mentioned. But I'd be interested, picking up on what Vasyl said, if you could also try and comment a little bit about the US perspective on this notion of guarantees for Ukraine looking into the future. Because I think at the end of the day, this is something very important. Thank you.
Sure. So let me start with the sanctions part of your question, and then I'm going to move on to F-16s and the guarantees. I think it's really important what Victoria Nuland last week said in one of her interviews. I believe it was Hürriyet Daily News, and I'm just going to quote her from here. I think Turkey completely understands that we have to dry up the money that fuels Putin's war machine, and that he has to pay a high cost. I think what's most important is that Turkey be very vigilant and not allow, even if it can't join sanctions, its territory to be used to evade sanctions. That's, for a US diplomat visiting Turkey, I would say that's as clear as it goes in diplomatic language to basically ask for Turkey, we understand your position that you're unable to be part of the sanctions right now. And so far, I have not, even in private conversations or public statements, I have not seen this be part of US ask at this point, that I have not seen Washington lean forward really strongly on Turkey asking them, you should be part of these sanctions. I'm sure they would welcome it for sure, but I think there is a realistic assessment of what Washington can get out of Turkey and what could be the main areas of cooperation. But I know for a fact that there are different task forces between State Department, Treasury, that are looking at the assets of the oligarchs, that are looking at how they might be able to bypass these sanctions, and they're basically tasked with closing these loopholes. We have actually seen this like 10 years ago during Iran sanctions, if you remember. So if there would be a point where Russian oligarchs would be able to find these loopholes in Turkey, I think this might become a point of contention between Washington and Ankara. But again, it's very early. I have not seen any indication of this, but this is going to be how strongly US can enforce these sanctions is going to be really important, and they're going to be looking for that. On F-16s, I think this is the next opportunity and challenge, to be perfectly honest. As you know, there is a very lengthy, rules-based and deliberate arms sales process in the United States for every single weapon sales to any country. And the US has made it extremely clear that it will follow this. Last week, I have reported indeed on a letter from the State Department to the Congress. And I have seen in various places that perhaps this be interpreted a little bit too positively than the letter has intended to be. I think it's really important that there were specific references that said having appropriate defense ties is a good thing, effectively is a good thing for US national interests. And obviously this was a letter specifically about the F-16s. So this is the context that US is talking about. But nowhere in any of these letters, it did not give any assurances that this sale will go ahead. It did not give a timeline. It was we will follow due process. However, I think, again, it was important that there was that sentence, because I meant to tweet this earlier, but I have, in the process of getting that letter, I have actually obtained another letter dated like about like a month before that, and I have not seen that kind of language in that letter. So like when you put two letters next to each other, it's actually, you can clearly see that there was a positive addition in this. However, the big caveat to this is Congress. Congress has been pretty against this sale. And there is a charm offensive in DC by the Turkish mission here to basically win the hearts and minds of Congress members. And I think Ukraine war, again, does create an opportunity, because the administration can come out and say, look, I mean, this war has only shown us that we really need to reinforce the NATO flanks everywhere. And this sale is like really crucial to basically do that, to achieve that. And Turkey is a NATO ally. And of course, we have seen Turkey buy S-400s, and we have asked them not to retain S-400s, and there hasn't been any progress on that whatsoever. But it is really important to still have that southeastern flank of NATO strong. So this sale is actually within US national security interests. We might very much see that from the administration, but I think the people that Ankara needs to lobby here is squarely the Congress, because there's still quite a bit of opposition for this sale. And certainly there are people who are on the fence. There are people who are more open to understanding Turkey's position, but there's still strong opposition. And they're seeking answers when it comes to S-400s, and there are other worries, again, like Turkey's human rights track record, when it comes to Syria policy and things like that. So the Congress is going to be key going forward, and we have to bear in mind that there is a midterm election in November, and that's going to be on the administration's mind as well. So let me leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Hümeyra. I'll come back to you on the U.S. position on security guarantees later, unless you want to respond right away, quickly.
Sorry, I felt that I did forget something. On the security guarantees, I think...
That's what I'm here for.
Thank you. I think on the security guarantees, this has been something that we have been asking in briefings and, again, like some private conversations. But like so far, I have seen a little bit of a wait and see approach from US. Just bear in mind that they're still managing this big crisis. And for example, when it comes to mediation efforts, I see the same lukewarm approach as well. Like there were the talks in Turkey, and they were very careful in how they interpret those things. And I mean, I have not seen a definitive like approach from US on this. I think they're still deliberating it. They're still examining the situation. And at the same time, they're trying to speed up their processes when it comes to weapons. And there are certain limitations on what they are able to do and what they want to do, I think. Again, the midterm background is relevant to this. So we have to think about like the extent of US help, security assistance, how much it wants to be involved. Like we need to think about all of those things in that context as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Hümeyra. Tacan, thank you for being patient. I'd like to turn to you now with all of these questions. And if I may also ask you a little bit about this issue of security guarantees, particularly with your background and experience, both in a NATO official capacity, but also in your national capacities in Turkey. How would you frame that discussion and Turkey's role looking into the future? And please pick up on any of the threads that we've discussed here. Thank you.
Well, there were a few questions directed to me. Perhaps I start with them. And I would also like to add a few words to what Hümeyra has said regarding US-Turkish engagement of recent days. First, regarding the membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO. NATO has its open door policy. It's enshrined Article 10 of the Washington Treaty. And Turkey has always been supportive of the open door policy. In the case of the aspirations of Ukraine and Georgia, Turkey has supported it from the beginning. And I must say that it has been the most vocal member within the ranks of NATO, expressing its support. Also in keeping in mind how membership has a value added for peace and security. And I would like also to share with you and the audience one interesting detail that we have to recall. Vasyl referred to 2008. And I recall the time when NATO summit was convened in Bucharest. I was there accompanying our president. And it was the most difficult question to address, the aspirations of two countries to become member. And a decision was made, perhaps not giving the membership action plan status to both countries, and putting this membership expectation in the air without any tangible step made at the time. That's why, together with my two distinguished colleagues, we co-authored an article how it would be different if NATO had taken the decision of both countries' membership in 2008. We always consider 2014 to be a watershed year, but perhaps we can think about 2008 as the most crucial year. And if the West had shown the resolute stand that they are showing now at that time, perhaps things would have been different as we speak. And one related thing that, again, it is useful to note, and you may visit the website of Kremlin from 2002, immediately after the summit meeting in Practica di Mare in Rome, to establish NATO-Russia Council. And in the Kremlin website, you will see that during the press conference on the topic of Ukraine's accession to NATO, Putin said that it was Ukraine was entitled to make its decision independently. He does not see it as something that could cloud the relations between Russia and Ukraine. These are things that I'm reading from the website. But President Putin stressed that Russia's position on the expansion of the bloc remain unchanged. What I'm trying to say that things have changed in Russian thinking from 2002 to 2022 dramatically, as I said, in such a revisionist manner. Now, President Putin should put the question to himself: why those countries, after the fall of the Soviet Union and dissolvement of the Warsaw Pact, chose to aspire membership in NATO, but not remain in the ranks of the Russian Federation. So for Finland and Sweden, I'm sure that Turkey will still consider it from a principal point of view and will support their aspirations if they choose to make such an application. And in recent years, we have such an advanced form of partnership with these two countries in the form of political dialogue, in practical cooperation. It is almost like a membership, but a few steps before that. Now, the second question on Montreux Convention, whether it was part of NATO consultations. I'm not aware of it, and I don't think that it was, and it should. As I said, Turkey is the custodian of the Montreux Convention. And for Turkey, it is so important to implement it in line with its letter and spirit. So most probably this decision was made by Turkey as the country to implement this convention. But certainly later on, the allies must have been informed as part of the international community not to send their naval vessels since there was a new situation, a war that all countries should be aware of. Now, a few words on US-Turkey engagement. Hümeyra mentioned the visit of Wendy Sherman immediately after the start of the war. And I have seen the press coverage of the visit of my good friend Toria Newland when she discussed, and it was the announcement made to have a strategic mechanism between the two countries. It is I must say, a step in the right direction. Although it talks about possible cooperation areas to be exploited and certain issues not to sort of evolve to a crisis situation, this mechanism can be considered a useful way forward. Although both sides should go beyond that. It can only be a first step. Why I say this? Turkey and the United States, they are important allies. And from the description that Hümeyra shared with us as to how Turkey is perceived in the United States, whether Turkey now realizes that it should remain in the ranks of NATO, to me it is a wrong description. Why? Since 2014, NATO has adopted so many decisions as part of military adaptation. These were so important decisions taken with the support of Turkey, because decisions at NATO are taken by consensus. So it shows that Turkey has been supportive of all measures pertaining to strengthening the deterrence and defense of NATO. Engagement with Russia, as I tried to allude to in the earlier part of my remarks, is something different. And I don't think that in any capital, there should be a wrong calculation that when there is a change of power in Turkey, all of a sudden, relations with Russia will change. No. Even I can tell you in 1960s, when we had a right-wing government, all heavy industrial installations were built with cooperation with the Soviet Union. Is, as I said, a neighbor to Turkey from north and south. And in many geographies, we have an engagement, not that we agree on everything. So I don't think that this would change. One thing could change, one thing could have been handled differently perhaps, and I have my views on that, the procurement of S-400 systems. To me, it was a big mistake, and that's why this system cannot be operationalized. It is still kept aside, and I heard Hümeyra enumerating some problems so sensitive to the United States. I can agree, and this can include S-400s. But equally important, and perhaps even more important than S-400 issue, is how Turkey perceives an allied country like the United States to support a terrorist organization, affiliates of PKK, PYD-YPG in Syria. And when we talk about unity, cohesion, and solidarity among allies, not a single citizen in Turkey, no matter which political affiliation they may have, can approve and consider US stand on this issue. So it is also a very difficult issue to be taken into account. And I must say that Turkey and the United States cannot defer it to the future, delay discussing these hard issues. There's a saying in American, to talk Turkey. And I think it is time to talk Turkey and to go to the depth of each issue that both sides confront. And I believe that strategicism should be able to expand to eliminate some of these problems, which, in my judgment, run the risk of damaging the very fabric of the bilateral relationship between the two countries. And who enjoys to see this? Certainly the United States, NATO's adversaries and rivals. Now, a few words on the security guarantees. It is a very tricky question, and it is not perhaps proper for anybody without knowing exactly the context and the conditions to define security guarantees, whether it will require military involvement, whether it is a political support to any arrangement to be achieved. Sometimes in the debates in Turkey, many think of the guarantees in the context of Cyprus question. And it gives the guarantor powers the ability to use force if necessary. So this was the context. But here, I'm not sure anybody is clear on what we are talking about it. And I rather wish not to speculate on this issue, but I can certainly highlight the sensitivity of the question when it requires military involvement in case the circumstances warrant. So it requires a more depth discussion with elements of the security guarantee to talk about.
Tacan, thank you so much. Hümeyra, thank you as well. I've tried to direct some of the questions, and there are hard questions there as well. Thank you all for trying to sincerely answer them. Vasyl, I'd like to turn to you last to bring us back dead on Ukraine directly and to share your last views with us, if you kindly would. And there were two questions that we in the private chat spoke about. Maybe you could address those as well. Please, the floor is yours.
So first of all, about sanctions fatigue. Look, if to look precisely, not all European countries have been addicted or have been fulfilling all the duties according to the sanctions policy. That is why a number of Western technologies were used by Russians even today, because they have been supplied up until the beginning of war, almost. The other thing is, will the West be responsible enough to take these sanctions seriously, not only to adopt them, but also to implement? So if the implementation will be as strong as it is announced, so it will be just continued. It's not about fatigue. It's about the rethinking about the world order in future, in case you wouldn't like to be dependent anymore on Russians, or in case you wouldn't like to continue to have some business with this bloody regime, which is killing innocent people in thousands. You should also take this responsibility onto yourself. If you are continuing to do this, you're sharing, and also in many European countries, they are paying a price for that. That's the issue, and it is widely used by the opposition and media. The other thing is about with NATO. So NATO, in my understanding, realistic expected NATO membership. So it is still open issue because the war is not over. And we didn't know how it will be finished. I mean, finished, or we believe that we should win in the battlefield, at least to make such a strong defeat to the Russians that it couldn't continue a war and start real negotiations. Because what now it's continuing to be changing position almost every day, as well with the agreeing corridors, etc. So Russia is not conducting war against Ukraine in a manner to contradict the West. They would like, first of all, to subordinate Ukraine and became it as a de facto situation to the West, and then to cooperate, communicate, or whatever, or impose its will to the West. So first, it's Ukraine. And let's think about it correctly. So in case we will defend ourselves, we will have a right to continue our bid to NATO. In case we will be in a position when we will be forced to sign some kind of agreement, which we believe should have a guarantees which shall substitute the sense of NATO, it means the collective defense. So it will be the other options. But for NATO as it is, and our president as well, when he was applying or he was addressing to the NATO meeting, he also mentioned that NATO will be stronger with Ukraine. And in Ukraine, there is in jokes that soon not Ukraine will be applying to NATO, but NATO will apply to Ukraine, or trying to join Ukraine, or vice versa, that not NATO defending Ukraine, but Ukraine is defending NATO. And this is de facto situation now. So that's a theoretical question now when we are in the battlefield. Let's defend, first of all, our soil, and then we will continue our bid with NATO or with the substitution of NATO with these guarantees if it will work, because it's an elaboration of something new which doesn't exist. Thanks.
Dear Vasyl, thank you so much. I want to bring our conversation to an end. We've been deliberating for over almost an hour and 25 minutes now. I think it would be an injustice if I try to summarize everything that has been said here. So I simply want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone who has kindly listened in and contributed to the debate with their questions. But I want to particularly address Vasyl, express my deepest sense of sympathy, particularly for the humanitarian suffering that we all witness in Ukraine in the face of this unjust war that you have been confronted with. I want to end with these words and once again thank everyone. And with your indulgence, I'd also like to thank my Carnegie team that has been very helpful in the background to make this a reality. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your good mediation and for your contribution to our discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.